All right, so welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
And today we're going to be looking at
Okay.
Dolly Alderton's Good Material. And this novel follows Nathan,
Okay.
who's a stand-up comedian
Uh,
grappling with a breakup
right.
and do some serious soul-searching. And
Yeah.
the source for this deep dive is an episode of the Digital Bookworm podcast. And they really went in on this book.
They did.
We're going to be exploring how Alderton uses humor,
Right.
vulnerability, and this vibrant setting of the London comedy scene to tell this story about love, loss, and growth
Yeah.
that might resonate with you on a personal level.
What I thought was so interesting was just how she doesn't just tell us about his heartbreak, but she
What?
just like drops us right into his headspace.
Mhm.
So we're right there with him, like feeling that sting of rejection and the confusion, the urge to wallow and maybe the urge to avoid dealing with it all.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes him such a relatable character, right? He's so
Right.
flawed and he's a bit self-absorbed, but, you know, he's just so undeniably human. And there's this one moment in the book that I was particularly struck by where he completely bombs this set
Yeah.
after his ex walks into the club.
Oh my God.
Yeah, you know, the podcast host pointed out how this scene really encapsulates that tension between his public persona and his private pain.
Yeah. That's such a brilliant observation.
Yeah.
That really highlights how the comedy club itself is more than just a setting. It's like this mirror reflecting Nathan's inner turmoil, you know?
Yeah.
Think about it, the pressure to like make strangers laugh when on the inside you're just falling apart. Have you ever felt that pressure to
Yeah.
perform in certain situations?
All the time.
To project an image that might not match
Right, yeah.
your internal reality?
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating how Alderton really uses that world of stand-up to explore this idea.
Yeah,
You know,
truly.
it's like the stage becomes this battleground for his vulnerability.
Exactly. He's hiding behind these jokes, but, you know, true growth can only happen when he starts to lower that shield.
Right.
And it's not just on stage, it's in his personal life, too. You know, he pushes away his best friend and he avoids dealing with his grief, all while he's trying to maintain this facade of being fine.
Well, and speaking of his best friend, you know, the podcast highlighted all the amazing supporting characters in the book.
Yes.
And they're not just there for comic relief. They actually play these crucial roles in his development.
Absolutely. Like his best friend, for example, their relationship is so hilarious and poignant. You know, there are moments of incredible support and brutal honesty.
Yeah.
Remember that scene where they're trying to cook a meal together
Sure.
and it ends up being like a complete disaster?
Sure. Yeah.
Like a perfect example of how these relationships, you know, with all their imperfections can actually push us toward growth.
Well, and that's what makes this book so compelling, right?
Yeah.
It captures that messy reality of relationships,
Yeah.
both romantic and platonic. And there's this one line from the podcast that really stood out to me.
Okay.
They said, Alderton doesn't shy away from showing how complicated love can be,
Yeah.
how it's often filled with misunderstandings and unmet expectations.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And it's not just about romantic love. It's about, you know,
I-
the love between friends, the love within families,
Mhm.
the love we have for ourselves,
Yeah.
and how all of those forms of love can be messy and challenging, but ultimately
Right.
incredibly rewarding.
Well, and this kind of brings us back to, I think, one of the book's central themes, which is vulnerability.
Yeah.
The podcast host talked about how Nathan's comedy kind of acts as this shield,
Right.
but it's also his way of connecting with the world,
Yeah.
even if it's only on the superficial level.
What's fascinating is how Alderton shows that vulnerability is not weakness.
Right.
It's actually a source of strength.
Mhm.
It's through those cracks in his armor, those
Yeah.
moments where he lets his guard down, that we really see Nathan's true potential for growth and connection.
Like that scene where he finally opens up to his best friend about his grief over his father's death.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
You know, the podcast host really pointed that out as this turning point for Nathan.
Mm.
And it just floored me as a listener.
Yeah.
It made me think about the power of vulnerability in my own life.
It's incredibly powerful, isn't it?
Yeah,
And often terrifying.
right.
But it's in those moments of vulnerability, both in the book and in our own lives,
Yeah.
that true connection and healing can occur.
Yeah.
It's like we're saying, this is me, flaws and all. Do you still see me? Do you still love me?
And the answer, at least in Good Material, is a resounding yes.
Yes.
It's through those messy, vulnerable moments that Nathan starts to build these genuine meaningful relationships.
Yeah.
Both with himself and with the people around him.
It's a powerful reminder that we don't have to be perfect to be loved and accepted. And it's embracing our imperfections that we can truly connect with others.
Yeah. And I think that's such a great point to kind of move on to the next section here, because it's interesting how vulnerability is so tied into the world of comedy. You would think stand-up would be all about projecting confidence.
Right, right.
But Alderton shows how those raw, vulnerable moments on stage can actually be the most powerful.
Absolutely. Think about like some of the most iconic stand-up routines.
Yeah.
They often draw humor from personal experiences, you know?
Yeah.
From those moments of awkwardness or failure or heartbreak. There's a reason why self-deprecating humor resonates with so many people. It's because it makes us feel less alone in our imperfections.
Right. And that brings us back to this idea of humor as a coping mechanism, something that the digital bookworm hosts really unpacked.
They did.
And for Nathan, stand-up isn't just a career, it's his way of processing life's curveballs.
Exactly. And that duality of humor is something that Alderton explores, masterfully. On one hand, humor can be a shield, a way to deflect pain and keep the world at bay.
Right.
It's like Nathan says in the book, jokes are my armor. They protect me from feeling too much.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, it can also be a bridge, a way to connect with others and share those difficult emotions.
It's like that moment in the book where Nathan's telling a joke about his breakup.
Yes.
And you can feel the audience kind of shift. The laughter becomes less about amusement and more about empathy.
Right.
It's like they're all sharing in his pain.
Yeah.
And in that shared experience, there's a sense of healing.
That scene is so powerful.
Yeah.
It shows how humor can be transformative, how it can create this space for vulnerability and connection. And it's not just about the audience, it's about Nathan himself.
Right.
In that moment of shared laughter, he's not just deflecting his pain, he's acknowledging it, he's processing it.
Yeah.
And maybe even starting to heal from it.
The digital bookworm hosts made a fascinating point about this. They said, Alderton shows us the double-edged sword of humor. It can be a way to deflect pain, but it can also be a way to stay grounded and connect with others.
Yeah.
And it made me think about how I use humor in my own life.
It's something we all do, right?
Yeah.
We use humor to navigate awkward situations or to diffuse tension, to cope with difficult emotions.
But the key is recognizing when humor is actually helpful.
Right.
And when it's actually hindering our growth.
Exactly.
It's like when you're going through a tough time and people are like, oh, just try to laugh it off.
Oh, yeah.
And you're like, that's the last thing I want to do.
Right. Sometimes you just need to feel the sadness or the anger or the grief.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, using humor to kind of lighten the load without suppressing those difficult emotions that need to be acknowledged and processed.
And that's what makes good material so much more than just a funny read.
Right.
It's a story about heartbreak and self-discovery and the complexities of human connection.
Right.
It's about learning to embrace vulnerability both on stage and in our everyday lives.
And it's about recognizing that the things that make us human, our flaws, our insecurities, our messy emotions, are also the things that make us relatable and lovable.
Absolutely.
And I love that the good material for growth and connection.
Yeah.
It reminds me of that scene towards the end of the book where Nathan finally performs a set that's truly honest and vulnerable.
Yeah.
He talks about his grief and his fears and his insecurities, and the audience is completely captivated.
Oh, that scene gave me chills.
Yeah.
It's like you can feel the shift in the room.
Yeah.
The laughter is different. It's deeper, more meaningful, and you can see the relief on Nathan's face.
Yeah.
It's like he's finally shed that armor and allowed himself to be seen fully and completely.
And in that moment of vulnerability, he finds true connection.
Yes.
Not just with the audience.
Yeah. Right.
But with himself.
Yes.
It's this powerful reminder that sometimes the scariest thing we can do is also the most liberating.
It's like that quote from Brené Brown.
Yeah.
Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. And Alderton shows us that courage in such a beautiful and relatable way.
It makes you wonder why, if vulnerability is the key to connection and growth,
right?
Why are we so afraid of it?
Yeah.
Why do we build up these walls and hide behind these masks?
Right.
Is it a fear of rejection? A fear of being judged?
It's probably a combination of things,
Yeah.
Societal pressures, past experiences,
Right.
the fear of being hurt.
Yeah.
But good material reminds us that the rewards of vulnerability far outweigh the risks.
Mm-hmm.
It's in those moments of letting go,
Yeah.
of showing our true selves, that
Oh,
we
yeah.
open ourselves up to the possibility of genuine connection
Right.
and deep, meaningful relationships.
And that's something we all crave, right?
Total.
To be seen,
Yeah.
to be understood,
Yeah.
to be loved for who we truly are.
Absolutely. And it all starts with taking that first step,
Right.
that first leap of faith into vulnerability.
It's like that scene in the book
Yeah.
where Nathan finally reaches out to his ex,
Yeah.
not to get back together,
Right.
but to apologize for his behavior and to acknowledge the hurt he caused. It's a small gesture,
Yeah.
but it takes immense courage.
And it opens the door for healing for both of them.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in the aftermath of heartbreak, there's still potential for growth and forgiveness.
So good material is about so much more than just a comedian's journey.
It is.
It's about this universal human experience
Yes.
of navigating love and loss.
Yeah.
And that search for connection.
Absolutely.
And it's about the power of vulnerability to transform our lives and our relationships.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And it's all told with Alderton's signature wit and insight.
And speaking of Alderton's writing, I was struck by the way she uses humor to explore these deeper themes.
Oh, yeah.
It's never forced or preachy.
Yeah.
It always feels very organic and authentic.
Exactly. And that's what makes the book so enjoyable to read. Yeah. It's funny, yes, but it's also deeply moving and thought-provoking.
It's like she's saying, life is messy. Relationships are complicated. But we can find humor in the midst of it all.
And that humor can be a powerful tool for healing and connection.
It makes you wonder if Alderton herself has used humor to cope with her own experiences of heartbreak and loss.
That's a fascinating thought.
Yeah.
It's like we talked about earlier. That line between the creator and the creation can sometimes blur.
Right. And it makes you appreciate the book on a whole other level.
Yeah.
It's like we're getting a glimpse into her own heart and mind, even if it's filtered through the lens of fiction.
It's a testament to her talent as a writer.
Yeah.
She's able to create characters and stories that feel so real and so relatable that they stay with you long after you finish reading the last page.
I'm curious what stood out to you the most about good material. Was there like a particular scene, a line of dialogue, or a character that resonated with you on a personal level?
There are so many moments that resonated with me, but I think the one that really stuck with me was that final stand-up routine where Nathan bears his soul on stage,
Yeah.
It's such a powerful image of vulnerability and authenticity.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that even when we feel broken and alone, we have the power to connect with others through our shared human experience.
Absolutely. It's like she's saying, embrace your imperfections, share your stories,
Yeah.
and you might be surprised by the connections you forge.
Yeah. And the growth you experience along the way.
Right. Totally. Well, on that note, I think we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
Sounds good.
It's amazing how Alderton manages to weave so many layers into a seemingly simple story about a comedian navigating a breakup.
I agree. It's deceptively complex,
Yeah.
It's like she took these everyday experiences, heartbreak, friendship, career struggles, and used them to explore these larger truths about the human condition.
And one of those truths, as we've been discussing, is the power of vulnerability.
Absolutely. It's a thread that runs through the entire book.
Right.
From Nathan's struggles on stage to his relationships with his friends and family.
And culminates in that final stand-up routine where he finally lets his guard down completely.
That scene was a masterclass in vulnerability. It's like he's saying, this is me, raw and unfiltered, take it or leave it. And the audience embraces him wholeheartedly.
Which is a testament to the power of authenticity, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. When we allow ourselves to be seen flaws and all, we create space for genuine connection.
It makes you think about the masks we wear in our own lives.
Yeah.
The carefully curated versions of ourselves we present to the world.
It's so easy to get caught up in that performance, especially in this age of social media.
But good material reminds us that true connection comes from stripping away those layers and embracing our imperfections.
And that it's okay to not have it all figured out.
Right.
That's part of what makes us human.
The book also does a brilliant job of exploring the complexities of relationships.
Not just romantic relationships, but friendships.
Right.
Family dynamics, even the relationships we have with ourselves.
Like the dynamic between Nathan and his best friend.
Oh, yeah.
It's a roller coaster of support, frustration, and unconditional love.
It felt so real, so relatable.
Yeah.
We've all had those friends who drive us crazy, but we love them anyway.
And those friends are often the ones who challenge us to grow, even when it's uncomfortable.
They see us for who we truly are, and they love us despite our flaws.
And that's a powerful message to leave readers with.
It is good material, is a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles, that there's beauty in our imperfections, and that true connection is possible when we have the courage to be vulnerable.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into good material, what's your final takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important takeaway is this. Embrace your messy, imperfect self. Don't be afraid to let your guard down and show your true colors. You might be surprised by the connections you forge and the growth you experience along the way.
Beautifully said. And if you're looking for a book that will make you laugh, cry, and think about life in a whole new way, I highly recommend picking up Good Material by Dolly Alderton.
And if you want to hear even more insights about the book, be sure to check out the Digital Bookworm podcast episode we mentioned. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next week with a brand new topic and a fresh perspective.
Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.
It's amazing how Alderton manages to weave so many layers into this seemingly simple story about a comedian navigating a breakup.
Yeah, it's deceptively complex.
It is.
Like, she took these everyday experiences, heartbreak, friendship, career struggles,
Right.
and used them to explore these larger truths about the human condition.
And one of those truths, as we've been discussing, is the power of vulnerability.
Absolutely. A thread that runs through the entire book.
Yeah.
From Nathan's struggles on stage to his relationships with his friends and family.
And it culminates in that final stand-up routine where he finally lets his guard down completely.
That scene was a masterclass in vulnerability. It's like he's saying, this is me, raw and unfiltered, take it or leave it, and the audience embraces him wholeheartedly.
Which is a testament to the power of authenticity, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. When we allow ourselves to be seen, flaws and all, we create space for genuine connection.
It makes you think about the masks we wear in our own lives, the carefully curated versions of ourselves we present to the world.
It's so easy to get caught up in that performance, especially in this age of social media.
Right. But Good Material reminds us that true connection comes from stripping away those layers and embracing our imperfections.
And that it's okay to not have it all figured out. That's part of what makes us human.
The book also does a brilliant job of exploring the complexities of relationships.
Yeah, not just romantic relationships, but friendships,
Right.
family dynamics, even the relationships we have with ourselves.
Like the dynamic between Nathan and his best friend. It's a roller coaster of support, frustration, and unconditional love.
It felt so real, so relatable.
It did.
We've all had those friends who drive us crazy, but we love them anyway.
And those friends are often the ones who challenge us to grow, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, they see us for who we truly are, and they love us despite our flaws.
And that's a powerful message to leave readers with.
It is. Good material is a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles, that there's beauty in our imperfections, and that true connection is possible when we have the courage to be vulnerable.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Good Material, what's your final takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important takeaway is this. Embrace your messy, imperfect self. Don't be afraid to let your guard down and show your true colors. You might be surprised by the connections you forge and the growth you experience along the way.
Beautifully said. And if you're looking for a book that will make you laugh, cry, and think about life in a whole new way, I highly recommend picking up Good Material by Dolly Alderton.
And if you want to hear even more insights about the book, be sure to check out that Digital Bookworm podcast episode we mentioned. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next week with a brand new topic and a fresh perspective.
Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.